We see that when we have this lack of energy, it drives us inward. It drives us into a point where it's feeling like us versus them, right? We're irritable with other people. We're antisocial. We don't see ourselves as collective. I think kind of the other thing I'm getting at here is it requires a lot of energy to separate ourselves from the things that we've been glued to. Again, going normally way beyond our physical body, right? It's our belongings. It's how big our house is or how nice our car is or our clothes or, again, our belief systems, all of these things. But when we're starving of energy, it digs us deeper into that hole.
Welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna Podcast. This podcast is meant to encourage you to connect within so you can share your light with the world. And now, here's your host, Harrison Ma.
Welcome, beautiful beings, mystical souls, to the Cosmic Love Antenna. This is a weekly installment, your next episode of your beautiful inner connection to your outer expression, where I, your host Harrison, here with the powerful guest that I get to dialogue and dance with today, set the intention of pulling back all the layers, restricting health, alignment, and your deep mystical love. And today I have the pleasure to have a beautiful man, a beautiful friend back on the show to dive a bit deeper and continue on from where our chat ended last time. But before I get into that, I just want to welcome all the new listeners to the show. If you're new to my voice, welcome. It's nice to feel you. It's nice to have you. If you're a returning member of the tribe, thank you for joining us today. Remember that if you get some value out of this chat, out of this conversation, it lights you up in some way. How you can support the show is by sharing this out to a friend that you love very much, a family member, a lover, and also going over to Apple or Spotify and leaving your feedback for me. I'm happy for all the love. I'm also happy for any insights, comments on how we can make the show a better dance for you as the individual. But with that, I want to quickly reintroduce this powerful man that I get to have a chat with today. Mr. Jay Feldman is a health coach, much like myself. He's an independent health researcher, a podcast host of the powerful Energy Balance podcast, and he's just a lovely, insightful soul as an individual who I have the pleasure to call a friend now, and I get to have these really insightful chats with. Today, we're going to continue with the bioenergetic view and approach to the world, but we're going to go a little bit deeper into the collective and what it means to take a bioenergetic approach as part of a collective. We're going to talk about a bit about the fasting element and what this means as an individual that's under eating, undernourished as part of a system. We're going to talk a little bit about coming together as a cooperative versus competition, what healthy debate looks like, and other juicy subjects. Jay, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Harrison. Quite an introduction. Thank you.
You're welcome. So yeah, I'm sure you know this, doing a show yourself. It's interesting how it develops, right? It's interesting how we obviously develop as individuals, but then the show is a reflection of that, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. And it's great to have everybody kind of join in on that growth and progression. Yeah,
it's a nice feeling. And I spend a lot of time in the energetic world, so I get to feel it. I feel it a lot more on some days more than others. Anyway, Jay, I would love to, let's get into the chat and, the subjects I know you can speak a lot to. I would encourage people to go back and listen to the first episode that we recorded together. And at the time of this recording, we haven't released it yet, but when you listen to this, it will be released. I think it's around late 60s, the episode. And it really gives you an idea of, Jay as a person, the bioenergetic approach from an individual lens. And I want to today focus on going a bit deeper into the collective tribe and what this approach, what this view can help us see and embody as a bigger collective. And the first question I want to throw at you, my friend, to speak to is, I know a part of the bioenergetic approach is, really gaining a higher attunement to our energy systems. And one of those pillars is, feeding our body, not under eating, not undernourishing. So I'm wondering if you could start this chat by speaking to one, what are the dangers of under eating? And let's expand it to what does this look like as a collective if we have a system of people that are under eating?
Yeah, it's a big question. Absolutely a big question. And to dovetail in or to build off of the last episode, of course, the primary idea here being that the amount of energy that we have available to stream through our bodies and structure, every single cell so that it's functioning optimally is what allows us to live, to move, to think, to breathe. And the availability of that energy, of course, has a dramatic effect on our mood, how we think, how we feel. So in a basic sense that I think a lot of people feel, everyone's heard of, I'm assuming, the idea of feeling hangry, right? You're hungry, and if you're too hungry for a while, you start to get angry. And that's a normal physiologic mechanism, and it actually is tied directly in with your question about under eating, because when we don't eat, our blood sugar drops, we have this release of stress hormones, and it's a signal. It's a signal that we don't have the energy available, or we're choosing not to consume the food available to convert it to energy. But that's a sign to our bodies that we want to turn down a lot of the functions that use that energy. And so that can make us feel angry and irritable. And we can talk about some other things that it can make us feel. But that's just, I think, an easy example that listeners can understand for themselves. And that was something that made a dramatic effect for me in learning to tune into how I felt and how much that can change by changing the types of foods I was eating or how much I was eating in terms of mood, in terms of my feeling toward others, and of course the community aspect that we're getting to. And so to circle back to under eating,
Yep.
to your question.
Well, Jake, can I ask a super quick question just to jump in, because it's, as you're speaking, I'm like, oh, this is what I like about you, my friend, because you're such a wealth of knowledge. And when I listen to you, especially when I listen to your podcast, there's so much that bubbles up that I think is so powerful to hit on. We'll continue with the under eating as a collective, but I just can you explain quickly for people listening why blood glucose variations, like the up and down, is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because as a collective, I think we have a view, especially if you look into the biohacking, the hormesis community, that we want to avoid those fluctuations, right? We have these glucose monitors now that are a big, market, right? And there's this collective view that we want to avoid those roller coaster shifts. We want to keep it as low as possible. Can you explain a different view on this?
Yeah, so we know in type 2 diabetes, which is normally full-on insulin resistance, we know that that's a state that comes with a whole host of issues and something that we want to prevent from happening. And in that state, we see typically very high levels of blood sugar and issues with insulin. At first, you'll see overproduction and then eventually get to a point where the individual can't produce insulin anymore and has to take exogenous insulin. And so that leads to fear around blood sugar. It has led to some fear there, where the idea is that when our blood sugar goes up and our insulin goes up, that's actually going to drive us toward that state. And it's an understandable correlation to make, but that doesn't mean it's actually what's going on. It doesn't mean that that's actually what gets us to that place. We've got a correlation doesn't equal causation sort of situation. And a lot of people who are in the biohacking space, again, just to kind of provide an analogy that might open somebody up to this possibility, we've been told the same thing about cholesterol and heart disease, right? There's this correlation between elevated levels of cholesterol and heart disease. Yeah, and one of the things that I think a lot of people in that space agree on is that correlation doesn't mean it's causation. And what an analogy is often given is we don't blame a fireman for a fire, right? So cholesterol can be a protective aspect of our immune system, has some anti-inflammatory effects, and could be overproduced in response to underlying issues that could be driving a heart disease state, as opposed to this idea that it's just elevated cholesterol causing heart disease. And we see a very parallel situation with type 2 diabetes, where the reactive increases in blood glucose and increases in insulin are trying to not overcorrect, they're trying to correct for an underlying issue. They aren't actually causing the issue. So
what's the step forward here, my friend? So is it more of a, and going back to the eating piece, that's why I asked the question, because I think this is a part of my journey when I have been in that sort of under eating stage. It's because of that fear of that blood glucose roller coaster. So what is the step forward as a collective, in your opinion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it would take a little while to unpack what's actually going on in type 2 diabetes and why the high blood sugar is not causative. But what I would say is that, just to keep it simple, the high blood sugar is not the driver there. And we can, if you feel like it's worth digging in, I'm happy to. But what I would say is, instead, when we're eating regularly, our blood sugar shouldn't be staying high for a long period of time like it would in someone who has type 2 diabetes. That is a sign that we're not using that glucose very well. And that's a sign of an underlying issue. It's not a sign of the glucose being the problem that's coming in, but rather that we're having a problem metabolizing that glucose and converting it to energy. And so in someone who is not having that issue, you won't see elevated levels of blood sugar for extended periods of time. But you will see elevated levels of blood sugar after a meal. You eat the carbohydrates, it's going to lead to a bump up in blood sugar.
That's normal.
Totally normal, exactly. And has been documented to be normal in metabolically healthy individuals. But now we have these monitors where we're seeing every bump up, and it's terrifying to someone who's
freaking us out.
Yeah. When we're told any spike above 140 milligrams per deciliter is going to drive us toward that diabetes state. And so in contrast, what I would actually say is that those momentary spikes and blips are just a function of how quickly we're absorbing the carbohydrates coming in. And we know that if we had just a pure glass of juice versus a meal that has juice, or a meal that has fruit, but also fats and proteins, we'll see different effects there. Neither of those are inherently driving us in a negative direction. We'll just see a spike based on how quickly we're absorbing that food, and then how quickly we use the glucose. So what I would essentially say is that as long as that blood sugar is coming down relatively quickly and back to baseline, there shouldn't be any issue there. It's just a normal thing that happens both with glucose and with fat too. We absorb the fat; it's going to increase in our blood as well, and that's normal. If anybody's had a blood test and they ate a meal and then tested their triglycerides, sometimes they'll be sky high, and that doesn't mean we're heading toward diabetes either with elevated triglycerides. It just means we ate a meal that was higher in fat.
Yeah.
And so,
and let me jump in there, Jay. And I'll say to people listening, if this is already getting really, really deep for you, that we are going to speak about different topics today, but each of these, especially this glucose piece, I was actually inspired from one of Jay's previous shows. So if you want to dive deeper into when Jay talks about this at more different levels, definitely go to listen to his show and the episodes he's done on these topics. So just for people out there that are maybe feeling like there's more here, and if we skip over it, Jay does a really good job on his podcast. Jay, let's shift here, because there are some other things I want to talk about, and I wanted to ask that just because of my own personal curiosity, but it also leads into the next subject I want to hit on here, and it's this idea of, we talked about at the end of the last show of the anti-authoritarianism pillar that is part of the bioenergetic approach, and if what we just talked about with the blood glucose was new to you, or if it was triggering to you, right, that's probably a sign that you as the individual are within a belief system, and that's okay. But I think what we need to aim for is as individual that can be in a belief system, but is also open to shifting and changing based off what their unique system is saying. And I think this is a very pivotal approach that we need to take a step forward as a collective. So one, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, my friend, and let's go a bit more into this topic at large.
Sure. So the general authoritarian idea is that we are outsourcing our knowledge or our view, or subscribing to some authority figure to tell us what's right. And that's largely what we're told when it comes to science, medicine, nutrition, a lot of areas of life, right? We're supposed to listen to what the authority says and absolutely not question it, because they read the textbooks. They have
the power.
They have the power. Yeah. And I think that this is, as you're kind of getting at with the power, this is a means to remove the power from us as both individuals and a collective, and put us into a place where we are forced, more or less, to follow the ideas that are given to us. And it's something that is so inundated from the moment that we, go to a school or reading books or teachers, that it's the generic way that we're typically taught all the time, right? There is an absolute right answer. This other person knows it. You have to regurgitate what they say. And we don't give much room for questioning, discussing the possibility that something we're told isn't actually accurate. It's not how our education system's built. It's also not how most of our society is built currently. And it strips us of our power and also leaves us with beliefs that we don't always know that we have, or that we have, but we don't always know why we have them, actually, as a result of this. And we might be holding on to limiting beliefs, or beliefs that are maybe farther away from truth, or that are restricting us, that we don't actually know because we haven't practiced challenging that authority, challenging those things, questioning those things, thinking very critically. And it's not an easy thing to do, but I think that this is one of the ways that we move forward as a collective.
It's so big, my friends. And I could just, this topic in itself, and this is really why I wanted to bring you back on the show, because we can go deeper here, and there are ways that we can handle this. But as we go further into this chat, for people listening, you can use this episode as a way to build this muscle, right? We're going to be talking about these different topics, and your belief system might be challenged, but it's okay for it to be challenged, right? It's a healthy thing, right? You have a choice, right? And I think I talked about this on the last show, but I'll just bring it up here again for people new and wondering. We are a being that has a thinking capacity, but we also have a intuiting, sensing, and feeling, right? And I often have found, and I think you might agree with this, my friend, that there's often that intuiting or sensing or feeling that can help us out of the belief system that we might be stuck in, right? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is our experience, our direct experience, which those are typically hand in hand, but we're all so often told to discount how we feel and how, what our actual experience is. And sometimes we're told not to believe our eyes.
Yeah. And I think, again, I think you'd agree with this. That's a big part of the design itself, right? You talked about the education system. You talked about, the big systems that play out there. I think they promote that limiting belief, and we take it on as truth, right? And then we're like, okay, if I do something different, then I must be wrong. I want to inspired something here, and again, I'm going to plug your show because you inspired me I'm doing a recording tomorrow based off something that you've recently done on your show, and you've done a few episodes on this, and it's this idea of healthy debate, right? Healthy debate, and taking someone else's perspectives and having a discussion around it, sharing your views that might be opposite, and allowing the people listening to make their own decision based off the two opposing sides of the story, right? And the most recent example of this is what you did with the Rob Wolf discussion perspective of the bioenergetic view. So I'm wondering, my friend, if you can speak to this, the role of healthy debate within this collective understanding of going forward, right? A collective unified populace that wants to build new ideas, wants to grow, wants to understand about energy and their body and whatever the part of their health they're looking into. How do you perceive the role of healthy debate within this movement?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the precursor to healthy debate is, of course, maybe not of course. I think part of the precursor to healthy debate is having a healthy relationship with our own beliefs. And if we associate very strongly with our beliefs as an individual, if I say I am, so the view that I'll talk about is terms of health, and really life is the bioenergetic view. And but what I'll often say is that this is a view that I have, or this is my view currently, or something like that. But if I instead take that as an identity, like I'm Jay, the bioenergetic guy. That then makes it very hard for me to challenge that belief. It's already, of course, difficult because this is something I've researched a lot and built an understanding around. But and so there's a lot kind of riding with that. But if I make that a part of my identity, anytime somebody challenges that belief system, it feels like a personal attack on me. And then you get defensive. And when you get defensive, you aren't open to any new ideas, and you also can't effectively communicate your own and have a healthy discussion or debate. And so I think that's really, I know you're saying where does healthy debate fit in, but I guess to zoom out, I think the bigger question is what is a healthy relationship with our own beliefs and thoughts? And if we can develop a healthier relationship where we have our beliefs, but they don't take on our identity, that our identity is something that, of course, is always in flux. We're always changing. That can involve our beliefs and every other part of us. And, we can leave it as simple as I am me. I don't have to be a carnivore or a vegan or a flat earther or this religion, anything. Yeah. Instead of identifying so strongly with those things, I think we can have a healthier version of who or what we are that is kind of always changing, and that can allow us to then question and question our assumptions, question our beliefs, and have debate and discussion and be open to other thoughts on it.
I have a very deep and spiritual question I want to ask you, my friend. But before I get to that, based off the identity piece, right? But before I get to that, I just want to something that bubbled up. You talked about we feel attacked when that belief system becomes our identity. In that feeling attacked, I think we also exacerbate the fight or flight state that most of us are in this world, right? I know you talk about this in a lot of your work, right? When we are undernourished, as we were just talking about at the start of the show, undernourished, not utilizing our energy efficiently, we're in a fight or flight state, most of us. And that's just from a food lens. I'm not even talking about, the toxins in the world, the EMF, the COVID, whatever. There's so much going on that's forcing us into a fight or flight state. Then you become identified by your belief system. Someone says something, you're attacked, and you're exacerbating that stressed system. And let me be very clear, we cannot access that intuition, that sense, and those emotions, those feelings properly if we're in that fight or flight state. Would you agree, my friend?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I'm sure, somewhere where we're going to be getting here is how does our physiology, how does the food we can eat bring us to that place as well? Because I think there's a lot of factors that are encouraging us to identify very strongly with our beliefs and attack anyone that feels otherwise and feel defensive when someone disagrees with us. I think some of that is intentional to keep us in that, this sort of state. But I think part of it also is, as you were saying, the food supply, the environments that we're in, the amount of work that we have to do just to survive. I think a lot of those things put us in a place where it takes a lot of energy to be able to detach and look at things objectively and take a step back and consider someone else's view. That's very hard to do when you're in a fight or flight state. It's very hard to do when you're under eating. It's very hard to do when you're not getting enough carbohydrates, I would say. Some of the things we talked about in the last episode all contribute. Yeah.
And that is really one of the things I've really enjoyed listening to your show and listening and taking more of the bioenergetic view is how much it's the opposite to that, right? It's really just relaxing and taking in the food and eating and being mindful and, not restricting the window and not, restricting yourself and just enjoying. And it's funny that we have to be taught this, right? I want to go back to what you brought up before around, I want to ask you this question because I'm just interested in your view on this. You talked about, getting to a place where we're not identified by the belief systems, right? Whether it's the bioenergetic view or carnivore, whatever it is. What are you, my friend? If you're not the identity and you get detached from that and you're in that space, I'm wondering what your perspective is. What are you in that moment?
Yeah, it's a big question. So I think part of the difficulty with doing that is if we've identified with our beliefs for so long, then without that as our identity, we can feel lost, whatever it is that we identify with, whether it's, we've already given the examples. So that can, I think, if we're used to that as our identity, then stripped of that, I think we can feel lost and uncomfortable and unsure of who we are. And maybe part of the answer here is see what happens, right? But as far as my thought process or belief here, I think of us, our consciousness, as individuals, as something that's always in flux. I also think dovetails in with how we ended the last episode talking about what love is. But I think another conclusion that you come to when you strip yourself of those things, strip yourself of you being your beliefs, you being your body, you being the things you own, you being, your fingers and toes. Instead, you get to a point where there isn't separation between you and every other consciousness. I think you come to a realization that it's all the same. We're all the same. We're all one. And I think that's the conclusion I've come to. Not alone, of course. Like, if there have been influences that have suggested these sorts of things, I'm not trying to say I discovered this, but
no. And it's exactly what you're saying in terms of you didn't discover this because this is a thing that's inherent in all of us, right? When you come back into and this is, we could do a whole episode just on this question, and I have, right? This is really the basis of this show. But when you come to that space, you realize that, and as you're beautifully highlighting, it is within the identity of the, and I'll make a different, I'll put a term here, right? The identity of the small self, right? When you take away the labels, you fall back into the identity, if you want to call it that, of the big self. And the big self is the unity that we all are, right? Is the connection, and I'll throw some terms out that I've used in the show before, whether it's God, divine, the quantum field, the unified field, the one consciousness, whatever you want to call it. For me, it's love in many ways. But the thing that they all have in common is that you've come back to a space and place where you're not alone. And funnily enough, my friend, talking about getting out of that fight or flight state, it is often being in that remembrance that then we are able to release. We're able to finally take a breath. We're able to finally breathe into our belly. We're actually finally able to take a deep breath out and let go of those things that have been holding tight onto us. Does that resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to get to some related topics here that are coming up, but I'll let you direct.
Well, I have another question, friend, but tell me what's coming up, because I want to meet it in the moment. What, based off what I just said, what is flowing through you?
So we talked about undereating, and there's a very famous study known as the Minnesota starvation experiment. And I'll try to keep the framing brief, but basically this was during World War II, and the subjects, the participants were conscientious objectors, so they did not want to participate in the war. Instead, they participated in the study, where it was a starvation study to mimic what was going on in certain parts of the world, see how long it would take to recover from it, and what would happen during that time. And so it was a group of men in their, I want to say, late 20s to 30s. They averaged about 165 pounds. And they were on a maintenance diet of 3,200 calories, where they maintained their weight and felt normal. And we can come back through these details, but they were then put on a what was called a starvation diet, or a semi-starvation diet at the time, which was 1,800 calories per day. And they were on that diet for 6 months. And a couple of things that might pop up to a listener is that doesn't sound that much like semi-starvation. They might be, the listener might be eating 1,800 calories a day, or might know a lot of people who are eating much less than the 3,200 calories. And so I think that's something to kind of bookmark. But during the time that these participants were in the semi-starvation period, the effects that they experienced were dramatic. And they weren't just dramatic in terms of weight loss and physical components and physical sort of degeneration, but there were a lot of things going on under the surface, which then bubbled out as well. And so on one hand, you saw a turning down of reproduction, libido, things like that. They mentioned that they would go to the movies. They used to be really interested in the love scenes and things like that, and had no interest at all. They had lost their sense of humor. They'd lost their ambition. They were depressed. They mentioned, describing feelings of neuroticism. A couple of them had psychotic breaks that were, borderline violent. And these were all, you can read through their descriptions. It's fascinating to read about. But it led to a couple other things. And so what triggered this thought? Of course, I was rereading this prior to our chat, so it was fresh in my mind. But some of the things that they also described were feelings of being antisocial, not wanting to socialize with other people, being irritable, being very self-centered. Things that they would never have described themselves as otherwise, and also having a tough time controlling their emotions, and everything kind of turning inward. And I think that this is a state of extreme fight or flight. A lot of, they're in a semi-starved state. And we see that when we have this lack of energy, it drives us inward. It drives us into a point where it's feeling like us versus them, right? We're irritable with other people. We're antisocial. We don't see ourselves as collective. I think kind of the other thing I'm getting at here is it requires a lot of energy to separate ourselves from the things that we've been glued to. Again, going normally way beyond our physical body, right? It's our belongings. It's how big our house is, or how nice our car is, or our clothes, or, again, our belief systems, all of these things. But when we're starving of energy, it digs us deeper into that hole considerably, and can make it really tough to work our way out. And of course, talking about debate, talking about being open to our own beliefs, I think it helps breed some empathy, right? To understand where someone's coming from when they aren't in that place. I know I've been in that place in the past where I have felt more defensive or more angry when someone's challenged me or something like that. I think we all fluctuate in those ways. And I think that having this sort of understanding also helps to build empathy toward that. And I think that's another byproduct here, kind of the opposite of the selfish, self-centered mindset that comes about when we're lacking that energy. And so I think that, it just comes back to that as a real key toward progress as a collective.
Oh, I love it. Well done. So you tied a lot of points into one little explanation there. That was beautiful. It's lovely to watch you do that. So a couple of things bubbled up. Firstly, it shows, I was getting a lot of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs as you were describing that, right? And it shows the role. I'm sure, are you familiar with the chakra system, my friend? Are you familiar with the energy system?
Yeah.
People listening to the show are very familiar. I've talked about it a lot, but it shows that the chakra system is in an order for a reason. So, for example, we have the heart, which is the balance of giving and receiving of love between individuals, right? We have our sacral center, which is our emotional being and our sharing our sensitivities and our beautiful all expanse of emotion. But the root chakra, which is chakra number 1, governs our physical being, right? Governs our fight or flight state, governs our structure and our physiology and our feeling of safety, support, and security. So the reason I bring this up is what you're just beautifully highlighting. I could have the best intentions in the world to connect to the collective or support the group or be a part of a tribe. But if I'm undernourished and not utilizing my energy effectively by the toxins in my diet or not eating enough, then I think, yes, there can be a point to be made about, spiritual mentors and yogis in the mountains that have developed their spiritual abilities beyond the need for the physical body. But that's not the majority. Most of us, we need that fundamental root chakra ticked off with our physical structure and fundamentals to rise both up the energetic system and the Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? Do you agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, as you said, that asterisk where we can overcome some of these things if we're very strong mentally and whatnot, but it's also a fight, a resistance that we don't need to have.
Yeah. we can get to that yogic mentor in the mountains. We don't have to get there with stress. We could get there like gracefully, right? With, again, enjoying the ride rather than, again, I've spoken to us about this on the show before, the spiritual journey. We have this, I often fall into this trap. It's not one of, constantly working and pushing ourselves all the time. We're meant to be here to learn lessons, but it's also, enjoy the ride, right? It's a big part of the bioenergetic approach at large. So anyway, I'm enjoying this chat, my friend. Thank you for the playing with me here. Another question I want to throw at you, and we were talking about it before, in versus the the cooperation versus the competition and the anti-authoritarianism pillar of the bioenergetic approach. I'm wondering your view on what is the role of control? What is the role of, and we're speaking at a collective level, right? What is the role of control with the systems that are outside of us that are coming into play with this, right? So me and you we understand what's going on here, but maybe some of the listeners who are starting to break free of certain belief systems, they're starting to realize that there's a lot of bigger, what's the word? Bigger entities out there that want to control the collective at large. So I'm wondering, what are your views on this C word, and how does this play into everything we've talked about?
Yeah. I'm just thinking about how much of our world can get flipped upside down when we're taught some of these things, when we learn some of these things, we come across some of these things. You know, a good couple of them would be, I don't know, like one is recycling, right? So this is just a little bit of a tangent, but just as an example, you know, we've been told that it's okay that and this is how recycling started. It was something that was, and again, this is not like my expertise or anything, but you know, it was put forth by corporate entities who wanted to be able to sell single-use items. And then there was a push against that all of it was going to be thrown out and end up in landfills and whatnot. And so then they came up with this idea of recycling so that they could still sell their single-use plastic and other, you know, single-use goods, with the idea that we would be recycling it, and it would, you know, from an environmental standpoint, it wouldn't be doing any harm. And I wish I had all the details of what's actually happened with the things that we've recycled. I don't remember so much of it offhand, but to keep it short, the vast majority of it doesn't end up being actually recycled into new material. It ends up going to landfills. It gets bought by China, you know, shipped overseas. So we get to use all the fuels and things that we're trying not to waste, just to ship it over there so that they can reuse small parts. Or I think even they just deal with trash. It's cheaper because they have more, I don't know, their landfill system. I should have, it wasn't something I was intending to talk about today.
But it's
so
a good example.
But
it's a good example. Right. And I think what you're getting at here, what it highlights is that, and I don't want to get too controversial here, but it shows that even when the agenda of a collective outside of us seemingly looks loving and positive, such as recycling as the example that you're giving, we still need to check in with ourselves. We still need to check in with ourselves and the choice that we're making, and come back to us as the authority, right? So with the recycling example, if I am doing that and that is their cause, a simple act that I could do is look into it. Like, is what they're saying and what they're doing with my recycling act actually what is happening? What you just described would say the opposite. But you're not special. You are beautiful, my friend, and you're a powerful being. But what you did to work that out, we can all do, right? So I think it's, again, coming back to whatever the agenda is, even if it's, I would say, especially if it's colored with loving intentions, we need to still use our power to do the research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's I appreciate you tying that back to the anti-authoritarianism, right?
Yeah.
This idea that we want to encourage skepticism, critical thinking, questioning.
Yes.
And especially the things that are pushed the strongest toward us, right? I think that those are the ones that we want to be most careful about, the things that we're trying to put our energy toward, that we think that we're helping. And it's tragic, right? Like we spend so much time and effort and intention toward doing good things. I mean, I recycled. I still do recycle, right? I mean, I'm not going to throw out the thing that I use. And of course, the goal here is to use fewer things that would need to be thrown out or recycled, or to look to other things that we can do with those items. But it's not like these things have easy solutions either. I mean, these aren't so simple. But I think the key here, as you were saying, is that we owe it to ourselves and to the people around us to do what we can, to the extent that we can, to learn about what we're being told, question things, question all the beliefs that we hold, right? And dig down deeper. And what we often find is that allows us to have a little bit more separation between us and our beliefs, which I think is a great skill to learn, but also ideally leads us to better progress forward.
Yeah. And that is really the intention of this show today, right? It's to really show what it looks like to be not just an energized, right, and a full of capacity, full of power, full of truth individual, but what does it look like to be that as part of a collective, right? That's unified under the same banner. And let's go deeper into this, my friend. Another question I want to throw at you here is another topic that we spoke a little bit about at the end of last show, but I want to speak more because I know there are probably other points you can add to it. It's the genetic determinism versus the idea that, again, we have choice, we have power, we have control over the set of genes and the genetic expression that we're given in this life that we grow into, right? So I'll start there. Where do you think this factors into the conversation that we've been having thus far?
Yeah, it works really well with your last question of control, right? Which I think I didn't really give a full answer to, but what I basically would say is that a lot of the beliefs that pervade, whether it's in science or other aspects of culture, whether it's related to, any kind of social things, a lot of times are not actual means of improving the world, but are methods of control, right? To make us feel like we're doing something that's right, that's good, that's helping others. And a lot of times is following or encouraging or allowing for the same agenda to kind of move through. And we, sometimes we can recognize that in different areas, right? We might recognize that, a company is trying to make profits more so than actually support a certain cause. And they're just supporting this cause for, to try to gain more profit. That could be something that could happen. But we like to think that in science or medicine, this doesn't happen, that these things are independent of this other system. And that because of that, they're more objective and they aren't influenced by capital and profit and things. And I don't remember what it's like over there. What's that?
If only that was the...
Yeah. And you can see it very clearly here. For example, you'll see commercials on TV. What I was going to ask, I don't remember if they're legal I know in some countries they're not, but not here in the States, where I don't live currently, but in the States, you'll have commercials for medications and they'll say, it's basically something along the lines of, do you want to feel better? Look at these people who are so happy. Here's this pill. And that's illegal in a lot of countries because it speaks exactly what I'm saying, where you're marketing to people. You are in kind of using a means of control of coercion to encourage someone to use a medication, which of course should be only used objectively for a medical purpose. Are those legal?
Yeah. So so they're not legal here in Australia, but I think the only two countries in the world actually, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, but pretty sure the only two countries in the world where that's possible is the US and New Zealand. I think they're the two countries, and it's a beautiful highlight of what you're saying around that control piece, but also going back to the genetic determinism. It also it takes our power away from that, because now where it's changing the view, right? So if I do have something, let's use the example of, let's say my dad has, this is a real one for me. My dad has IBS, right? And I have the genetic disposition to have that in my life. I'm not taught about what I can do as the individual to change that, to stop that happening as a chronic challenge. But what I am taught through the media that we just explained is that here is this pill, here is this quick fix remedy to numb down the symptom, that if I actually spend a bit of time listening to and going a bit deeper on, I could actually turn that switch off entirely, rather than putting a Band-Aid over something that is coming up every now and then, right?
Right. Yeah. And so to touch on that genetic determinism piece, the idea of genetic determinism, which goes hand in hand with neo-Darwinism, is the idea that our genes control everything about us and are essentially set in stone, although there's some kind of caveats currently that, some of these things can be changed by our environment, but those are newer additions and still are considered to be very limited in scope. But the basic idea here is that our genes control our health, and our genes are passed down from generations before us. And The only thing that changes genes is random mutation. And if there is some random mutation in a gene that allows for a certain trait that works really well in the world, in the environment, it'll continue on. And if there's a mutation that leads to some worse function in an environment, then that gene will, you won't reproduce as effectively. And eventually that sort of genetic makeup will die out, or there will be a separation between species. And there's a couple of key points here. So one is the idea that you were kind of getting at, which is that our genes everything is predetermined, and that goes to everything health-wise, right? Our different conditions, our disposition toward weight gain, being overweight or being lean. It's all determined ahead of time. Our intelligence, everything. It's all genetically determined. So that's kind of part one. And the other thing is that the driver and shifter, the only thing that can affect the genes is randomness. It's just purely random, and then whether that happens to fit in with the environment.
Yeah.
And
we have no power. I was just going to say, we have no power, no control. I'm just noticing again the similarities here of what we've been talking about. We're just a leaf in the wind, and we just have to let the powers outside of us take us to where we need to be and just show up. And while I think that's very poetic and beautiful as an image, it's not the reality. It's not the reality, right? So I just want to add that. Keep going.
Right. Well, and that's the poetic side. There's also a terrifying, tragic side, which goes along the lines of, on the societal level, if somebody is doing much better, that's just because their genes allow them to do so. And it's luck, it's random, and it's nothing to do with their environment, their opportunity, their, anything else like that, their choices, the choices of the generations before them. Those had no effect, right? And same thing on the other side, right? If you're sick or poor, bad luck, sorry. It's not like there was anything that actually encouraged that to happen in any way, or led to any further division of classes, or led to any, led you to be in that position. It's just the randomness of the genes that led to you to be in that position, and there's nothing you can do about it. And not only is there, of course, nothing that you can do about it, but again, there was no oppression that went into that. There was no, what's the word? Exploitation that went into that. I know we're getting darker here. I don't know if you want to go down that route.
No, but it's true. And we need to hear the shadows so we can bring it back into the light. Right. And this is just to give an example of this. I've talked about this on the show before. Look at what's happened over the last 2+ years now of events in the world. And don't need to go into the specifics of everything, but a lot of what COVID has brought out as the pandemic at large, it's actually awakened a lot of people to what we're talking about here. It's awakened people to this control. It's awakened people to their power and what they can come back to as the individual across all aspects of their health, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical. And it's helped us very plainly see these mechanisms that are in play, right, across all spectrums of our society. So I just add that because we don't want to negate the darkness, right? We want to see the darkness. We want to see what choices it's in implying, and then make a different choice, right? And that's what we're really getting at here. Jay, I want to maybe summarize all this now. And this is sort of where I want to land this show. And I want to because I know you have thoughts on this. And you've been expressing today from the stressed out individual, the eating piece that we started with, talking about the anti-authoritarianism, the cooperation, the genetic piece that we're just hitting on now, the control, all of it. And it describes where we're at, describes where we've come from, describes some of the changes we're now making. When you project into the future with a lot of these bioenergetic pillars, the pillars of the bioenergetic view, and a future that we deserve to step into, right? A future where we do have power, we do have community, we do have tribe, we do de-identify from the belief systems, and we do have healthy debate, all the things that we've discussed today. What does that look like for you? What do you hope to see? What do you wish to see through both the work that you're doing as an individual and some of the pieces that we've been talking about today?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think a lot of what you described as the kind of means of progress is, it's hard to think beyond that. So I think having, the kinds of things you described, right? If we're at a point where we are reducing divisions between us and the people around us, and we are engaging in healthy discussion, and we are orienting ourselves, our lives, our efforts toward supporting the people around us, doing better for the world, our communities, small and large. I think in some ways, like that is, I don't know, that is the endpoint that I look to. I can't imagine how dramatically society could change, right? It's hard to imagine. Obviously, there's been dramatic changes throughout, the history that we know of.
Well, I'm wondering, so let's take it back down to the individual, right? You've shared on your show, my friend, the changes that you've made as a person just based off the diet that you've shifted into, right? Or not having a diet, right? Having the bioenergetic view and utilizing energy to an efficient degree. Maybe you can explain what big shifts have occurred in your life just by simply utilizing energy more.
Definitely, yeah. That's something I can speak more to without such conjecture. So, and some of this is tough to remember. Even it's been quite a while since. And things shift all the time, but I know that shifting the food that I was eating, right, and I was coming from a place very similar to, I know what you've done and what you've described in terms of a lot of biohacking and fasting and ketogenic diets and on from there. And I know that when I made certain shifts food-wise toward supporting the amount of energy that every cell hypothetically would have to function, and turning down those stress systems, turning down the fight or flight, all the other shifts that happen hormonally, that I know for me, some of the things that stood out were shifts in, there were certainly shifts in personality and sense of humor. And I think with that there came what led to that was having a much lighter view of the world and seeing beauty in areas I didn't see it before, right?
And that in itself, Jay, just to interrupt you, at that seeing beauty where you didn't see it before, the world didn't change. That beauty was always there, right? But you changed, right? And that is really the crux of this question that I wanted to pull out of you, and you're doing beautifully, my friend, is, again, when we take our power back and we take the choice back, right? And if it's simply, eating more, as we've been talking about today, or, testing our belief systems or having healthy debate. I want to share this with you and get your perspective on this. I'm heavily into the Vedic worldview at the moment, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but the Vedic worldview teaches that there is no objective outside reality. There is just the internal state of being, the internal state of consciousness we're at, that we then project out into the world and we see through, right? And that's exactly what you just highlighted, right? When we start to take our energy back, when we start to take our choice back, when we start to take our control back, when we start to take our role as the individual, a part of a unified collective back, right? The beauty now becomes a consistent part of our life because we've changed and come to meet it, rather than suppressing, ignoring, numbing, and being too stressed out to see it. Does it resonate, my friend?
No, it does. And yeah, I think, another way of thinking of it is that does change reality as you know it. Which is to say, putting it just in different terms, but the same thing that you're saying.
Yeah. And I look to the future, my friend, and this is not a myth or something that is out of reach. This is something we all can do, starting as the individual and then rippling out into the tribe. Jay, thank you for going deep with me here today. I know that this is a world that is sometimes difficult and challenging to spend time in because there is a lot of big questions here. But you've done a beautiful job, and I've loved hearing your views and perspective on this. Do you have anything, before we wrap up, anything else you want to share on top of your heart? Maybe something you wanted to speak to, or anything exciting you have going on in the world that you want to share with people listening?
Not too much comes up as far as things that I think, I think we jumped around and touched on some really cool topics, and yes, and kind of wove them together. So yeah, I think that was great. And I think I'd rather leave that untouched as opposed to try to, add a little addendum on here and then, just be kind of a half discussion or half comment. But yeah, as far as things that I'm working on, of course, as you mentioned, the Energy Balance podcast is kind of the biggest place that I'm putting that work forward right now. So that would be it. I don't think there's anything.
I think it's really your big pillar of light in the world, my friend, that is really attracting people towards you and getting it. It's a really good place, again, just for people that are new to Jay's voice. If you have tuned into him today and you've enjoyed his perspective and view of the world and his love and his light, the show, the Energy Balance podcast, is a really good way to get into his specific worldview, right? And like we've been talking about here today, view his belief system, view where he's sharing from, test it against yours and see what happens. And I know it's really brought up a lot of love and extra expansion inside of me. Jay, I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you for spending time with me today. Thank you for going to the deeper ends of this topic and conversation. I love you very much. The people out there in the podcast world, thank you for giving us your time, your attention. We'll see you next time here on the Cosmic Love Antenna. But until then, sending light, sending love your way, and have a beautiful day. Bye, everyone. All right, beautiful souls. Before I leave you today, I'm excited to share an announcement and a powerful transformation with you. Starting on January 1st, 2023, I'll be launching a 1-year coaching program, one-on-one with me. So if you're looking to move through inner child wounds, ancestral healing, spiritual gifts, overcoming religious trauma, or anything else you hear me speaking about on this podcast, then this program is for you. This is your opportunity to spend a year in my frequency to help you expand one-on-one straight into your nuanced, specialized, and individual needs. This is for you if you're ready, if you feel committed, if that heart is pulling you to the change that you deserve. If you feel like this is you, please message me the word, the comments, the statement, 1 year love on my email or on my social channels, and we'll book your free call to feel in and tune in together to see if we're a good fit for this beautiful transformation. Please be aware I'm only bringing on a certain amount of people for this. So if this is you, please take this advantage before I fill up all my spots. I'm excited if this is the pull that you need, and I'm excited to get in touch and honored to take this journey with you. Sending love, sending light, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Cosmic Love Antenna podcast. We hope you enjoyed. Be sure to follow Harrison on Instagram, Twitter, and Clubhouse at Harrison Ma. That's Harrison, MEAGHERISON.